Wake up. It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 152. Sleep and temperature regulation gonna make you sweat. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist, sleep specialist, and your host for this episode of the podcast. If you're new to the Sleep Unplugged podcast family, welcome. If you're a veteran, welcome back. We are glad you are here. If you want to get in touch with the show, you can reach me most easily through my social media. That is Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter or X, Dr. Chris Winter Bluesky Threads. We have a YouTube page where we upload the videos of all of our podcasts. And if you're watching this video, you're probably thinking, damn, that is some really bad video quality. That is because I am in New York City with the good people of Natrol, filming some promotional videos and having a meeting for their new line of sleep supplement products, which I'm really excited to be a part of. They are not sponsoring this podcast. We do have an amazing sponsor for the podcast, but that's why I'm in New York, why I'm in a hotel, why I don't have my nice lighting and nice camera. And because I'm going directly from New York back to Florida, back to Virginia, back to New York again, I was like, I'm going to get this podcast recorded because I'm not going to have time when I'm back in Florida to do it. So the audio equipment is top notch. The video leaves something to be desired. Speaking of our sponsors, once again, for the fourth episode in a row, which is a new record for sponsorship, Authenticity 50 is sponsoring our podcast episode. And this topic of temperature regulation, night sweats, diaphoresis, if you want to, getting hot and sweaty at night, is a perfect vehicle for talking about Authenticity 50. We've talked about their products over the last several episodes and in our pillow fight episode, which they were a participant. So speaking of pillows and cooling, they make high quality, fully adjustable pillows that we talked about last week with the episode of back, neck, and shoulder pain. They are comfortable and feature a cooling cover that is machine washable. They make sheets. Once again, we've talked about those quite extensively. They have thousands of five-star reviews. People really like them. They're made from 100% US grown cotton with a perchlite weave, just like you would find in really fancy hotels. So if you're somebody who sleeps hot and get night sweats, these sheets are very airy and breathable. And we'll talk about in the interventions for night sweats, a lot of recommendations sort of center around a breathable fabric, and cotton can be a very good one. So they're very good at keeping you nice and cool at night so you don't get too hot and sleep through the night and not have those terrible night sweats. I've talked about before, my personal favorite product they make is their Heritage blanket. I've got the throw in the prairie yellow, although I'm actually a really big fan of the island sand color. I chose prairie yellow because it went with some items in my living room and I thought it looked nice in there. And I like that kind of pop of that yellow, mustard yellow color, which is really nice. Anyway, so I want you to check out the Authenticity 50 products at Authenticity 50. That's Authenticity 50.com. As a special gift to our amazing Sleep Unplugged listeners, they have given us a discount code Unplugged15, which is going to help you save 15% off your first order. Follow them at Authenticity 50, find them online, order what you need to be comfortable and not sweat at night. So let's talk a little bit about night sweats and the epidemiology of night sweats. There was actually a 2012 study that I came across that gave a pretty startling statistic, and that was that 41% of primary care patients, so people are going to see their primary care clinician, reported night sweats at least monthly. It was interesting. Later on, I found an article that said the incidence of night sweats typically in adults 10 to 41%. So I suspect it's probably a bit lower than 41%. That just feels a little high to me. Maybe it's high because maybe I don't do a good job of asking my patients about night sweats. Maybe there's a bias that I am unknowing, when I'm talking to a young man, I'm not asking them about night sweats, but maybe an older woman, I might do that. So maybe I'm fooling myself a little bit, but the statistics seem to indicate maybe a lower number, but still 10 to 41%, even if we're talking about 10%, that's a pretty high number. The biggest age range that seems to have night sweats is in that 40 to 55 age range. 12% in children, although it's very poorly studied. This was from one study in China. I think it had about 850 participants that showed about a 12% prevalence of night sweats in younger people. And most reported cases of night sweats do not find any concerning pathology. And I think that's really important. There, there are certain um, there are certain symptoms that are often brought to a primary care doctor where we often don't find a concerning cause. Dizziness tends to come to mind, headaches tend to come to mind. Not that these can't indicate something severe going on, but the majority of those things are generally not going to return a negative pathology. When it comes to night sweats, you typically don't find any cause for it. Yeah, sometimes when we evaluate people with, with restless leg syndrome, we check a ferritin level. Oh, it turns out your ferritin level's low. We often send them for workups. I used to do that a lot when I was younger in my career. Those workups virtually never returned anything pathological. No pathological bleeding, no iron, deficient. It was just you just have low iron for no real apparent reason. So I kind of think of night sweats as sort of being in that category. Why do we sweat at night? So, the differential diagnosis, that's a term we use in medicine for you bring me a symptom and I'm going to talk to you about the many diagnoses it could be. Blood coming out of your ear is a symptom, it's not a diagnosis. Why is there blood coming out of your ear? Well, you could have a cut, you could have a mass, a tumor, or some, etc. A tick has lodged itself in your ear and has bit you, and a little bit of blood's coming out. So when we think about night sweats, we're talking about a symptom, not necessarily a diagnosis. So when we think about the diagnosis, there's a whole group of them that are sort of under the umbrella of being benign. Your room is too hot. You are eating a diet that is very spicy. You're drinking caffeine late. You're just eating in general too late. When we sleep, we go through various stages of sleep. We've talked about this before, REM sleep being one of them. When we go into REM sleep, our temperature regulation is to some degree suspended. We become, what is the term? I think it's poikilothermic, which is what a snake is. They don't have the means to regulate their own temperature. So the snake's temperature sort of assumes the environmental temperature. That's what being cold-blooded is. We as humans are kind of cold-blooded during REM sleep. So a lot of times, depending on what you're wearing, ambient room temperatures, etc., when we are in REM sleep, we're susceptible to more night sweats. Exercise timing, I would put in there. You're somebody who works out really late at night. I was talking in New York. There's a bunch of media people and fitness influencers and health influencers and lovely dietitians and nutritionists, all kinds of people who have a sort of interest in that place where supplements and sleep sort of come together. One of them was talking about eating, or no, she was talking about running her fitness studio that she started, which was called Housework. I thought that was so awesome. It was such a great brand name. Anyway, she teaches some classes here in New York City later at night, and she said, a lot of times when I do those things, I tend to sort of keep my temperatures up. It stays kind of high, and I tend to, sort of have trouble sleeping or sweat at night. So the proper timing of our exercise is important. I would also throw in there sort of circadian factors, meaning that if you're somebody who's on night shift and then suddenly switch to day shift, I was talking to another guy, and his wife delivers babies at a hospital here in New York. Sometimes she works nights, sometimes she works days. I imagine that in those transitions, there could be more night sweats just because if you look at somebody's temperature curve, it tends to peak around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, troughs about 2.5 hours before we wake, 2 hours before we wake up. That if we're suddenly switching shifts, that temperature curve is going to move back and forth as we adjust those shifts, and you could see night sweating there as well too. When we look at pathological causes, disease causing night sweats, there are a bunch of those as well too. Infection, TB was always the classic one if you got it on an exam in school. Night sweats were the heralding sign of consumption. Remember Doc Holliday? Speaking of Val Kilmer, the late great Val Kilmer and his amazing performance as Doc Holliday in Tombstone. What do you remember about Doc Holliday in that performance besides his amazing lines, one after the other? I'm your Huckleberry. Just so many great lines. One of them was the fact that he's sweating all of the time. He is in a perpetual state of perspiration. HIV is another chronic illness that often gets associated with chronic sweats, but there's a bunch of malaria, tick-borne illnesses. They're all the kind of not great illnesses that are kind of weird. Now, any infection that causes a fever can cause night sweats. A lot of times when we think about malaria and these tick-borne illnesses, there's specific night sweats, meaning you don't tend to sweat as much during the day, but you do at night. Just something to think about. Rheumatoid arthritis and diabetes are often considered causes of night sweats, as is pregnancy. I've seen several patients who have had night sweats as sort of a heralding symptom of their pregnancy, but it can certainly happen later in the pregnancy as well too. I came across this and could find zero information about it. In fact, my literature search, it came to a pretty abrupt end because I was scared somebody would look at my search history. It was breast implants. And I got the impression it was not so much the idea of the foreign surface on your chest, meaning if I put some sort of silicone pads on my own chest and kind of affix them there, that wouldn't necessarily cause the night sweating. I got the impression from what little I could find that it was something about the silicone causing the night sweats. But again, can't quote me on that one because it was mentioned in a review article, but I really couldn't find great information supporting that. Menopause, hormone imbalances for sure. Some unusual tumors, pheochromocytoma. That is right out of the episode of House because it's such a bizarre tumor. It's a tumor of the adrenal gland. So the gland is producing adrenal hormones like epinephrine or adrenaline, essentially. So these individuals have a fast heart rate, high blood pressure, cardiac arrhythmias, and night sweats. And it can be a very dangerous one if not figured out. So it's a very thrilling episode of the medical TV show. There's always pheochromocytoma in those. And we look for pheochromocytoma a lot in individuals not only who have night sweats, but have unusual and sudden elevations of blood pressure. I believe the diagnosis involves like collecting somebody's urine for 24 hours and looking for the signs of cortisol and adrenal hormone byproducts in the urine. Cancer, lymphoma is a big one. Gastroesophageal reflux disease, hyperthyroidism, which makes sense. The thyroid's kind of working overtime, can create some sweating. Obesity for obvious reasons. Tricyclic antidepressants, SSRI, so medications. There are a bunch of them. Also steroids, hormones, pain relievers, opioids, antihistamines, beta blockers, niacin. I was taking niacin many years ago. I always struggled with my own cholesterol. It was fine, but it wasn't great. So it was always, the overnight oats and beans have been a miracle worker for me. Man, my cholesterol dropped a tremendous amount just because I added beans to my lunch. Like every day at lunch, I'll just have some beans, and it's incredible what they've done. But I was taking niacin for a period of time because somebody said that could help as well too. And I remember one day taking it and I was driving my kids somewhere. They were younger. And all of a sudden I was flushing. I mean, my face felt hot. I was driving down the road, looked myself in the rearview mirror. It was bright red. And I remember saying to my kids, because I didn't put two and two together, I should have known this. In fact, I had a college roommate who was very thin, who took niacin for the flushing response that you get from it. So I was having that response. I thought I was having an allergic reaction to something. And I remember telling my kids who were in the back seat, guys, I'm going to pull over. I'm going to try to find a place to pull over. Here's my phone. I think I'm having an allergic reaction to something, which I'd never really had before. And I was like, I might lose my airway. I might not be able to breathe. If anything negative happens here, you need to call 911 and tell them where we're at. And I kind of gave them, and they were terrified, as was I to some extent, because I was not in a place to seek medical help. And it turns out it was just a flushing response from niacin, which was highly uncomfortable. I would not recommend that to anyone. Anxiety, insomnia, PTSD, so sort of more psychiatric or psychological causes for it. Sleep apnea is a cause. Autonomic disruption conditions that sort of feature sort of autonomic instability, Parkinson's disease, MS are two that kind of come to mind. Pott's disease could be in there as well too. And when you look at these, symptoms and trying to differentiate which diagnosis you have, some of the things that might elevate your concern about the night sweats are drenching night sweats, fever, lymph node enlargement, and sort of sudden onset. Um, and there was a great review article from 2020 from American Family Physician. It was written by Carl Bryce, who said, specifically related to sleep, night sweats were associated with feeling generally tired, restless or fidgety legs. We've talked about that before. And some leg jerking during sleep. There's often this sort of disruption and fragmentation when people sleep. However, the increased sleep latency and frequent nighttime awakenings was looked at sort of in a retrospective study of about 282 patients. They were referred for polysomnography in the presence of night sweats. And the night sweats didn't really seem to show any difference in terms of objective measures, including sleep latency, apnea-hypopnea index, arousal index, periodic movement index, or even total sleep time. There was an Icelandic cohort study, however, that showed that nocturnal sweating was reported by approximately one-third of men and women diagnosed with sleep apnea. When they looked at individuals in an age-matched group, the treatment with CPAP seemed to reduce the incident of night sweats. So in Iceland, they said, no, there does seem to be an increased number of people with night sweats who have sleep apnea, and treating the sleep apnea seems to make it better. So before we get into interventions, I have made a massive mistake in the podcast. And if you listen to the podcast, I record it once and that's it. So the mistake I've made very quickly is we always talk about a song lyric in the title of the podcast. And this week's podcast was Sleep and Temperature Regulation, Gonna Make You Sweat. So 1990, you might be thinking, oh yeah, Gonna Make You Sweat. That is CNC Music Factory. But no, it was from a 1990 album, not CNC Music Factory. It was actually Robert Plant's solo album, Maniac Nirvana. I believe that was his fifth solo album. I am a huge fan of Robert Plant's solo work. I think it's really interesting, experimental. We talked about when we talked about Phil Collins. He actually played on some of Robert Plant's solo projects, and this was from the song um, Mom Said You Cried in Your Sleep Last Night, which is actually a remake of an older song. And I don't remember who did it. It's like Toby or Tito something. Can't remember what it was, but the Turtles actually recorded it too. They did not fare well in terms of charting and whatnot. When Robert Plant recorded it in 1990 for his album, it actually did quite well. It was one of the singles off the album. I think the other one was Hurtin' Kind, which was a great song. And I also love the song Tie Dye on the Highway, if you're wanting to listen to that. And the Tie Dye on the Highway is interesting because it starts off with this spoken thing that you can hear. What we had in mind was Breakfast in Bed for 400,000, which of course was from Wavy Gravy, who famously said that at Woodstock because the plan at Woodstock was to feed everybody that came, the 400,000 people. So he sampled that little segment at the beginning of the album. Gonna Make You Sweat is actually from the Led Zeppelin song Black Dog. So he's actually sampling his own song or his own song lyric in the song. So we'll put on there Black Dog and we will put on there Ma Said You Cried in Your Sleep Last Night for the Sleep Unplugged Spotify playlist. We will not be putting on CNC Music Factory, although a fantastic song and definitely gets you on your feet at the wedding when it is played. So going back to our podcast, we're going to talk about interventions. I think the biggest intervention for night sweats is the most obvious intervention for night sweats, which is make your bedroom cooler. What is the optimal temperature? 60 to 67 degrees. I always say 65. I think that's the number I have in my head. We talked about sleep and temperature way, way back, episode 25. We also talked about sleep in extreme temperatures like cold plunges and saunas in episode 71, if you want to check those out. Using a fan can be extremely helpful. So if you don't have the means to really cool your bedroom, using a fan that's blowing on you can make a massive difference. There are technology devices that use air cooling to cool you underneath your bed. I guess like an air jet or something like that. I've never really been a big fan of those, but some people really like those a lot. And also, consider some sort of window cooling ventilation. I mean, a lot of my patients in the wintertime will just open up the window. They like the bedroom really, really cold at night. That really helps them quite a bit. I think a big problem there with the ambient temperature of the bedroom is partner disagreement. And we'll talk about some solutions here in a minute that might be helpful for that. Using some sort of cooling sleep surface. So we want to use breathable bedding, cotton, bamboo, linen. We were talking about Authenticity 50 at the top of the show. Authenticity 50 also has a comfort temperature duvet cover that uses wool as the insulator, which does a really nice job of keeping cold sleepers warm at night, but warm sleepers from getting too hot. That really has to do with the natural coil and crimp design of wool. If you ever see like wool fibers under a microscope, they're really interesting to look at. If you do camping or any kind of outdoor activities, wool socks, wool everything, because it's a great insulator. It also dries quickly if it gets wet. It can still insulate when it's wet. So it has all kinds of amazing properties. So those air pockets in the insulation tend to trap warm air close to the body, so it prevents heat from dissipating. So it makes people who are cool warm. But the air pockets also allow for a degree of breathability, meaning the fabric can allow air to sort of circulate, moisture to evaporate, which is important for keeping the wearer cool in warm weather. So once again, please check out the Authenticity 50. That's authenticity50.com. Special gift to our listeners. Remember Unplugged 15 to save 15% off your first offer or your first order. So the duvet cover, the heritage blanket, your sheet set, your adjustable pillow, it's all there. You get 15% off that first order. So make that first order a good one because the code only works once. Generally speaking, when it comes to bedding, we want to avoid memory foam and use some sort of cooler mattress topper. That's not entirely true today. There are plenty of memory foams that are infused with different technologies that allow it to be quite cool. I think the Tempur-Pedic, Lux Breeze and some of those those are really cooling mattress surfaces. If you don't believe me, just go to a showroom and stretch out on one of the Tempur-Pedics. Some of those, higher priced Tempur-Pedics are really quite cooling in terms of the nature of those fabrics. So, but the older memory foam tended to trap heat a little closer to our body. So be very careful if you're buying sort of off-brand memory foam or off-brand memory foam toppers, because they can be pretty hot. When it comes to what we wear, probably nothing at all is best. If we're going to wear something that's lightweight, moisture wicking clothing can be very helpful as well too. In terms of eating, we want to avoid alcohol, avoid caffeine, avoid spicy foods, and really avoid any eating in that 2 hour window before we go to bed. That's, people always say, where does this 2 hour window sort of come from? I think eating close to the time you go to bed, digestion can disrupt sleep, but temperature is a big part of that. No eating within, 2 to 3 hours of going to bed. So sort of keeping that in mind. Same thing with temperature. Let's finish up the exercise, finish up the sweating 2 to 3 hours, or sorry, 3 to 4 hours before we go to bed at least. If you're going to exercise in the evening, restorative yoga, yin yoga, those kinds of things are fine. But really hardcore Pilates, aerobic activity is probably not great right before you go to bed. But as I've said before in podcasts, if that's the only time you have to exercise, I think you should exercise. We'll deal with the sleep consequences. I think that's better than not getting any exercise at all. Meditation kind of pairs nicely with that stressful day. exercise that's a little bit later than you want it to be. You're really trying to use that time to settle your body, reduce that cortisol, enter into that rest digest mode rather than the fight or flight. So using some sort of box breathing, 4-7-8 breathing technique, all those things are great. There's no such thing as a bad meditation style. Keeping a regular sleep schedule. Again, we want to minimize that variation in our temperature curve, which is very important. Medications, there are some, they're all off label. These are not things I would typically do, but there are some reports about using a medication like clonidine to help reduce that vasomotor instability and lower temperature at night. Gabapentin or pregabalin, often called Lyrica. Low doses can reduce central arousal and stabilize thermoregulation. And then the final group of things that might be helpful for somebody are tech solutions, bed cooling systems. We've talked about ChiliPad and Doc Pro, I like a lot. There's also 8 Sleep. One of my listeners wrote and said, 8 Sleep puts the Doc Pro to shame. And I was kind of like, okay, I think 8 Sleep's awesome. But the top of the line 8 Sleep, when I just looked it up, and you can look it up yourself, was about all said and done. I was checking out to see what I was going to pay, about $5,100. The top Doc Pro system, California King, biggest one you can get, all the bells and whistles, $2,100. So it might be better. I'm not sure, as somebody who uses a Doc Pro, and they're not sponsoring this podcast, I'm not sure it's $3,000 better, meaning I can buy two Doc Pros for 42, 4,300 and still be under the cost of one 8 Sleep. So again, I can't speak from a lot of certainty because I've never slept on an 8 Sleep. I have slept on the Doc Pro. I rarely have to change the water. That was another complaint somebody had. I have with the older Chili Pad. I did have to change the water quite a bit. The Doc Pro, I really don't. And it is effing freezing. So cold, unbelievably cold. Like it's you're not gonna buy the Doc Pro. I'm sorry, did I say 8 Sleep? Doc Pro. I sleep on a Doc Pro. You're not gonna buy the Doc Pro and think, I wish it went a little colder. Like I can't sleep on it at its coldest if it's right underneath my sheet. In fact, I have a wool topper on top of my mattress. So it's mattress, Doc Pro, wool topper, and sheet, Authenticity 50 sheet right across there. And still, it's really cold. If it were Doc Pro Authenticity 50 sheet, my naked body, no, sir. In fact, we did that one time. I used to tell people, I think I probably said it on earlier episodes of the podcast that had to do with temperature. I sleep on the Doc Pro at the coldest temperature. Yes, I did, but I had no idea it was put underneath a wool topper by my partner because one day she decided I'm going to wash the wool topper and took it off, made the bed with that Doc Pro right under the sheet. I got in and was at one point in the night, I was like, wow, this seems really cold. At one point in the night, I was so cold I couldn't move to reach over and turn the Doc Pro off. I was paralyzed by cold. Little diversion there about the Doc Pro, and I really appreciate that listener writing in, sharing her thoughts. I think it was on Instagram. She posted that. So 8 Sleep, you're awesome. I think maybe for a cost per unit cold, if you're an 8 Sleep user, convince me that I'm wrong and it's worth an additional $3,000. I want to hear from you. Smart thermostats, I think, are awesome. I use one. Everybody should be using a smart thermostat. The technology is so readily available. It's programmable. It's easy. It's great. And then wearable trackers, interestingly, was mentioned in an article that said that, hey, you can use this to maybe try to figure out patterns in your sleep. As you're on the nights when you stay up late, on the nights when you consume alcohol, and then the days where you exercise, is there a pattern between that behavior and your night sweats? So that's it. Night sweats, temperature regulation, done and dusted. Tell me about your own night sweats. Do you sweat at night? Does your partner? What was the cause? What worked for you? Any of these interventions have you tried? Let me know what you think. Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter. You can find us on our YouTube page. Please support Authenticity 50, authenticity50.com. Use that unplugged code 50, unplugged 15 code for a discount. We really, really appreciate their sponsorship over the last 4 episodes. You guys are great. Looking forward to talking to you guys in the future. And until then, sleep well.